More Than a Game with host Frank Gifford, an exclusive arts and entertainment special presentation. Next.
Hello, I'm Frank Gifford, and welcome to A&E's exclusive presentation of More Than a Game. Racing for Olympic gold or streaking through the schoolyard. Sports are about winning. The press and the public demand it, and the cost is high. From a champion pushed beyond her physical limits to teenagers who inject themselves with steroids, and the violence that transforms sportsmanship. Faster, longer, stronger is expected. From the pros on center court to city blacktops and school gymnasiums, sports have become more than a game. If sports were ever just a game, they're not anymore. This series is an up-close look at sports and their role in our lives, not just in the United States, but around the world. It's a role more prominent than anyone could have ever predicted. For instance, in this country, the Super Bowl has become a huge cultural event that draws more television viewers than any other program. And every 4 years, the whole world focuses on sports as nations compete against each other in the Summer Olympics. And star athletes now have the kind of fame and admiration that used to be reserved for political and religious leaders. In More Than a Game, we'll show you the positive aspects of sport, the great stories of human courage and triumph. We'll also investigate the negative aspects, including drugs, violence, and the corrupting influence of big money. And we'll hear firsthand from some of the world's most famous athletes and coaches. We begin with a special report about
And with 3 more Russians to come, and this girl, Yelena Mukhina, who has really been setting very high standards right through every exercise, now coming up to start her floor exercise in the European Championships, gold medalist in the floor.
Nowhere are the pressures on children more acute than in the former Soviet Union.
A round off a flip back and a full twisting double back somersault. Plus a great deal of elegance. So in the acrobatics that you're seeing now, and you're seeing a great performance. And the score is 9.95. That is the highest score by any competitor in this women's championship so far.
Yelena Mukhina won 3 gold medals in the 1978 World Championships. But she doesn't thrill the crowds anymore. While training for the 1980 Olympics, she broke her neck. Mukhina is confined to a wheelchair. She blames her former coach.
It happened very simply. Everything had led up to it. I wasn't physically or emotionally ready. My injury could have been expected. It was an accident that could have been anticipated. It was inevitable. I had said more than once that I would break my neck doing that element. I had hurt myself badly several times, but he just replied that people like me don't break their necks. And again, it's not that you can't, but that you don't want to. You're not conscientious. You're lazy.
She was hailed as one of the greatest talents ever. When she was injured, what came out was a variety of skills that she's supposed to have been performing when the injury happened. But stories came out. Was it, did she do it on bars? Where did she do it? And eventually the truth came out. It was in a floor exercise. She was tired. Maybe that extra repetition, that extra demand from the coach caused it.
For 5 years, Yelena Mukhina had been one of the Soviet Union's star gymnasts. Few matched her elegance and style. Her success also brought glory for her coach, Mikhail Klemenko. They had worked together since Mukhina was in elementary school.
Mikhail Klemenko treated me like a living robot. Apart from the gym and gymnastics, nothing existed. I didn't have the right to be ill. Problems outside sports simply did not exist. He didn't understand that I might be tired. He would say, "You're not tired, you just don't want to do it." That was his method of training.
The state wanted triumphs for Soviet sport at any price. The Soviet people worked for those triumphs. The state machine worked for those triumphs. The end justified any means whatsoever, including the most ignoble ones like drugs, like gymnasts being crippled, anything at all.
Допинг, калечение людей, все что угодно. Да они уже снимают, это плачет уже все равно. Поэтому пусть сами вырезают, что хотят.
Tatiana Grashkova is part of the last generation of gymnasts produced by the state system in the old Soviet Union. At 17, she was a European silver medal holder.
What are you doing? You are bending your legs and turning. Your pelvis is hanging down. I ask you to push up from the horse. Push, rotate, and then somersault. You didn't do any of that.
Along with world champion Svetlana Boginskaya, Grashkova is training here at a summer camp for elite gymnasts. She's coached by Elvira Sadi, herself a two-time Olympic gold medalist. Despite the breakup of the Soviet Union, many of the top gymnasts have been kept together to compete for the CIS, the Commonwealth of Independent States.
Работай.
Мне вообще сейчас немножко стесняет.
I found all the exercises a bit difficult today. The standing jump didn't work out. I was worse on the bars. The floor exercises weren't too good.
Не очень.
And you got upset because it didn't work out?
Да.
Yes.
Do you often get upset when you're training and things don't work?
Вообще бывает, когда
Sometimes when you're very tired and tense.
большое напряжение, так.
It's difficult before
Перед
competitions.
соревнованиями трудно.
You don't want to do anything. Only the first part was correct.
These
children are in the Soviet national team. They're select children, fanatical children with enormous will. They all want to be champions. There are 20 of them. The winner will be the one who works hardest. Results only come from work. It is hard.
As it turns out, results in the Soviet Union came from more than just hard work. There was cheating on a scale beyond what anyone had suspected. It's now alleged that Soviet coaches even forced young women to become pregnant so their bodies could soak up more nutrients. We'll look at that when More Than a Game continues here on A&E. We now return to More Than a Game. This is the National Gymnastics Center 60 miles from Moscow, which has turned out some of the most successful athletes in Olympic history. This is where the national team trains for as much as 8 hours a day. Faster, higher, stronger urges the motto above the entrance. This system created a dynasty. The Soviet women were team champions at every one of the 9 Olympics in which they took part. Coaches searched the country looking for potential gymnasts who were barely out of kindergarten. The best of the best went to specialized sports schools where intense training and competition produced the finest gymnasts in the world. But with the end of communist control, some incredible details have emerged as to just how the old Soviet regime achieved and maintained its great success.
Дело в том, что спортивная гимнастика и это прежде всего.
The point is that gymnastics, and this is mainly an invention of Soviet sport, has gone miniature.
Маленькая, миниатюрная. Девочки приглашались.
Almost exclusively small, thin girls are used to enable gymnastics to become even more intricate. Special potions are used to retard a child's growth.
Останавливают рост ребенка. По брусьям из этих прыжков падений.
They all have flattened vertebrae.
Позвоночник сплющен, потому что
because of the heavy workload, the girls don't grow. Their vertebrae get squashed. They become small and stumpy.
Они становятся такие вот маленькие, упругие, такие как пни, как пеньки. Но мне кажется, что тут надо говорить.
But you can't just talk about the physical consequences. There are psychological ones as well. Even if a girl is scared by a dangerous fall, she'll do it anyway because that's what the adult wants.
Так того хочет взрослый.
When we met her, Tatiana Grashkova was training for the World Championships, about to be held in the United States. Her coach, Elvira Sadi, meanwhile, was hoping to leave the Soviet Union for good. She was in line for a coaching position in Canada. But in the Soviet trials, Tatiana finished 11th and failed to qualify for the World Championships. Elvira Sadi, however, got her new job in Canada. It was a bitter end to a 10-year partnership. Soviet coaches were simply expected to win, not only in gymnastics, and apparently they stopped at nothing, including forced impregnation.
I want to say something not only about gymnastics, but about endurance sports like skiing and running. Barbaric methods are used, like making a girl pregnant. When she's pregnant, her organism absorbs naturally all the vitamins and substances which are fed into her body. She is nourished, as it were, by these juices. And not long before the competition, the pregnancy is terminated. But the sportswoman is physically in perfect condition. But I don't think that even the greatest ends can justify such inhumane methods.
I would treat very seriously any accusation or any story that came out of the Soviet Union with regard to manipulation of the onset of puberty, to the actual induction of pregnancy, with the advantages of vitamin intake that brings with it. I would treat it very seriously because I do really feel that the Soviet Union did pass through a phase where victory was all important. Supremacy, physical supremacy, was important. And you have to remember that these people were out there as a release to the normal humdrum existence, and that they would allow themselves to be manipulated.
The children of Russia are still pushed to win. This is the huge gymnasium of the Moscow Dynamo team, where the next generation of Russian gymnasts have their limbs stretched. This is how future champions are molded. But these children aren't here under government duress. Since the collapse of the Soviet Union, the state no longer pours money into sports. Many sports clubs are actually broke. Parents have to pay to put their children through the agonizing selection process. The goal is for their children to be accepted into Moscow Dynamo, with the chance of someday making the elite national team. For these kids and their parents, sports are one of the few remaining ways to escape the impoverishment of Russian life. A political system has collapsed, and an entire nation has disappeared from the map. But inside Moscow Dynamo's gym, It's as if not much has actually changed. The stress on winning certainly isn't exclusive to Soviet athletes. No one wanted to... The Soviet Union was perhaps the greatest sports dynasty in history. Its teams triumphed more consistently than the old New York Yankees over a longer period of time than the Boston Celtics. Gymnastics, track, weightlifting, it almost didn't matter which sport. Once the Soviets got involved, they usually dominated. But now that the Soviet Union has collapsed, there are revelations about just how that success was achieved and maintained. We always heard about scientific training and great coaching. We didn't hear about the drugs and exploitation. This was a nation in which the wrong result could earn an athlete a trip to Siberia. That actually happened to one former player, and you'll meet him in a few minutes. During this program, we'll look back at the Soviet Union's great triumphs, and we'll hear from some of those amazing Soviet athletes. In the wake of all the political turmoil, Soviet domination of sports seems a lifetime ago. In a sense, it was.
But the world record holder striking for home. The Russians 1, 2, 3.
This was a scene we witnessed time and again. Soviet athletes at the Olympic Games, leaving the rest of the world in the dust.
153.42, a new world record.
I think it achieved a success in sport that is unique in the history of sport, and particularly in the history of the Olympic Games. Not only has the Soviet Union, for example, won every Olympic Games for which it has entered, with the exception of 1968 in the summer and 1980 and 84 in the Winter Games, it was by far the most versatile nation at the Seoul Olympic Games and the Winter Games of the same year, 1988, winning medals in 21 of the 23 sports. No one has ever come near to that before.
The gold medal in the first of the women's apparatus finals goes to...
But the Soviet Union's long-standing domination of international sports may have died right along with communism.
A clean sweep on the medals in the hammer.
Soviet Union.
You will still see top-flight athletes because there are people in the pipeline who are going to be top-flight athletes. But I think the organization is beginning to disintegrate, and I think the ability to mount a team effort is going to disintegrate. And people really want to represent their own country. They want to represent the Ukraine or Georgia or Lithuania. They don't want to represent the Soviet Union anymore. So especially in team sports, I think where you could have drawn the best and the brightest from this vast country, you'll see fewer victories, less ability, because that's the nature of what happens as this empire breaks itself apart.
Top athletes stood apart from their Soviet comrades. They were a privileged class in a supposedly classless society. Now that the Soviet Empire has broken apart, those elite athletes are faced with a harsh reality.
The ones who want to be world-class athletes now know training is going to be harder to get. The money to go to events is going to be more difficult to obtain. And even when they win, they're going to go home and they're going to get a few handshakes and a clap on the back. But basically, they're not the huge heroes that they used to be.
As far as the public is concerned, and this is part of a Russian propensity to go...
What I had in the Soviet Union was that in a country where almost nothing worked, sports worked. And it was very well organized. Clearly, it was an extraordinarily high priority to Soviet leadership to make this successful and to make this world class. And they started children, like that. Little children were brought into these schools. The training begins, the selection process, who's going to be a gymnast, who's going to be a runner, who's going to be a swimmer. And this was extreme high priority. And it sort of proved the point that if you have a poor country, but you marshal what resources you have and you focus it on one little thing, you can do very well.
Nearly every day, another sports complex is opened. The state spends over 100 million rubles a year on sport.
During the 1950s and 60s, new gyms and stadiums were built throughout the Soviet Union. According to party propaganda, they were intended for the welfare of the general public. In fact, these facilities were part of a giant machine that churned out exceptional athletes. Potential stars were identified almost from birth, and Soviet scientists used all their expertise to help young athletes develop. That included using the latest drugs and the latest way to conceal drugs.
A great deal of expertise was poured into sports medicine. And this was particularly important, of course, in terms of drugs. There was the East Germans and the Soviet athletes used to say, well, at least we're being monitored properly when we take our drugs, unlike you in the West take them haphazardly. And in fact, very few Soviet athletes were ever caught taking drugs. There were a few, but not very many. It's not because they didn't take them. We now know almost daily in the Soviet press names of Alexeyev, the great weightlifter, who Yuri Vlasov says in the press regularly took anabolic steroids, that they took maturity preventing or retarding drugs, blood doping. All this was done, but under very close supervision of a very large number of people throughout the health and scientific community.
Beginning in the earliest grades, Soviet children were regularly tested using the latest technology. Scientists determined which sport was most compatible with an athlete's natural ability. Then the athlete was pushed in that direction.
There are factors which determine if children are genetically suited for sports. Some people are better equipped for the training required by high-level competition.
All this testing could identify potential athletes. But as the doctors discovered, even the best technology could not predict who would eventually become a champion.
Our doctors were doing research. They were checking the speed of movement and also the reaction speeds of different groups of sportsmen. The results were quite unexpected because we found that the quickest reactions of all came from the chess players. We can explain this phenomenon because the speed of mental reactions is closely related to the speed of physical reactions.
Gymnast Nellie Kim was a product of the Soviet system. Looking back now, she doesn't attribute her success to science and technology. According to her, the Soviets excelled for a very simple reason. They had the best coaches.
I was an average schoolgirl. I was 9 years old and in the 3rd grade. My future trainer came to my class at school and said, I would like to take this and this and this girl. And so I was selected. From the age of 9, I started doing gymnastics. There are scientific tests to help find future gymnastic stars, but I don't believe in them. I believe in the intuition and experience of the coaches. So when my coach selected me, he was not thinking of any ability I might have, but he realized that I was very keen to train hard.
Whatever the reason, the Soviets kept developing world champions, especially in gymnastics. Lyudmila Teresheva was one in a long line of Olympic gold medal winners.
I began training 2 or 3 times a week for about 1.5 or 2 hours. But later on, when I started making progress, I began training more often. And when I became a member of the Soviet national team, I was training every day and sometimes twice a day for about 6 hours. It was professionalism.
A potential champion like Lyudmila Teresheva had everything at her disposal. The finest facilities, the best coaches, and the opportunity to train whenever she wanted.
The system was behind its athletes all the way. In return, the system expected championships and gold medals.
Ну, наверное, вы знаете, в первую минуту приходит сознание...
Well, the first reaction when you have won is that you are a member of the national team.
Естественно, каждая команда и страна...
You feel happy that you have fulfilled the tasks set for you by the Soviet Sports Committee.
Конечно, первое время возникает мысль, что ты справился с задачей, что...
First, you get satisfaction from that you've achieved your goal. And then comes your own personal happiness.
Oh, no. I felt I'd done it for myself. It was for me. Me and my coach, we did it together. Of course, it is glory for your country and to see the flag raised. I don't know what sort of child might think that he or she does something for the motherland, or for the state, or for the government. A child does it for herself, first of all, and then comes the rest.
Nellie Kim and Ludmila Torsheva seem to look back on the Soviet system with some affection. Other athletes look back with anger, especially the many professional athletes who have moved to the West.
For any Soviet athlete, there is nothing more rewarding than to see the red flag saluting the triumphs of Soviet sport.
Success in sports meant success for the entire Soviet nation.
The same philosophy they brought to defense.
In 1980, the Soviet Union hosted the Olympic Games for the first time. The U.S. boycotted these games to protest the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. Still, this was a crowning achievement for Soviet leaders who were on hand to bask in the glory reflected by their athletes.
Up it goes. And he takes the lead, 2:37.5, and nobody's going to better that. Salnikov, 35 meters out in front, all by himself, and it's a new world and Olympic record, a superb swim. Full twist on, touches.
Soviet athletes dominated the Moscow Games, but at the same time there was a growing criticism of the sports establishment. Elite athletes were the target of jokes about their lack of education.
Russians have a saying, I have two sons. One is smart. Unfortunately, the other one is a sportsman.
Everywhere you look, there are signs of a great transformation in what used to be the Soviet Union. In the shadow of the Kremlin, American fast food franchises are thriving. There's been a similar transformation in sports. The Ministry of Sport no longer exists. No one knows what will take its place. This is the famous Dynamo gym that produced so many Olympic champions. Now it's in a struggle for survival. The gym has been turned into a circus, its gymnasts into theatrical performers, ironically dressed in outfits that symbolize the West. They hope to tour the world. Foreign currency is needed to keep the gym alive.
When Dynamo was faced with the problem of earning money, we began by renting out our gym, opening it up to groups who pay subscriptions, although children pay only 10 rubles. But the most important thing, and I want to stress this, is that we have become the masters of our own gym.
When government funding came to an end, so did an entire era. Young athletes no longer have access to the best coaching and training. I suppose. For many years, the Soviet Union was considered our political and ideological enemy. But even during the height of the Cold War, we marveled at the Soviet sports dynasty and the great athletes it created. Now, that dynasty is coming to an end. While sports in the Soviet Union were supported by the government, here in the U.S., many of our sports are financed by television. TV is provided. When the Olympic Games opened in Munich in 1972, Olga Korbut was barely known outside the Soviet Union. 1 week later, she was one of the most famous people on earth. What happened in the time between was a perfect example of television at its most influential. Through their TV screens, viewers discovered more than Olga Korbut. They discovered the sport of gymnastics.
Olga Korbut. Oh, look at that magnificent movement.
By then, television technology had advanced to the point where it could fully capture a magical moment like this. Around the world, people were mesmerized, and not just gymnastics fans.
The thing I remember the most about Olga Korbut was she looked like the only gymnast that was really having a good time. She made gymnastics look like it could be fun and could be interesting, and you didn't have to be really big and look really, really strong to be able to do gymnastics. And I was a very small girl, very small child, and I thought that probably that sport was going to be for me.
The images are still there. You can still see videotapes of it. And whenever people see it, they still are stirred by her performance. Television made Olga Korbut, and Olga Korbut made gymnastics.
Fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. There is no doubt that this girl is one of the greatest things to hit gymnastics in this modern era.
First of all, she was an incredible gymnast who did things that no one had ever done up till that point. And the second thing was she epitomized the thrill of victory and the agony of defeat, because she went one night, she was spectacular. The next night she fell off the bars and was in tears and went away crying. She then came back to win the night after that, or very soon after that. She was a tiny little person. She was the youngest one around, and she obviously loved what she was doing.
I had phone calls from the most unlikely people, teachers, and how do we get started and all the rest of it. Anyone that knew gymnastics in those days was regarded as an oddball. Gymnastics was an odd sort of sport. Cold gyms, very few people ever watched it, you know, unknown quantities. All of a sudden, everyone wanted to know about the sport, and everybody, particularly parents, wanted their kids involved in the sport.
Oh, that was terrific. How can you take it away from this girl? Isn't she marvelous?
The hyperbole was justified. Around the world, gymnastics clubs flourished and parents enrolled their sons and daughters. Olga Korbut's impact was short-lived, but there would be other stars to follow.
The history of television and sport is littered with flash in the pans. The Olga Korbut example in the early 70s. Now, what's interesting to watch is how long the phenomenon lasts. The Korbut thing went on for a year, but there was never any long-term growth in that. And there was never any long-term growth in the television ratings. And
This is Frank Gifford. More Than a Game continues tomorrow at 8 o'clock Eastern, 9 Pacific, here on A&E.
Combat at Sea will return next week at its regular time, here on A&E.